After 18 years together, I discovered all our accounts emptied. His text simply read, "I deserve happiness." As he celebrated buying his mistress a beachfront condo with our life savings, my father's attorney arrived at my door. "Your father always knew this day might come," he said, handing me documents for the $450 million inheritance Dad had secretly arranged. When I walked into the housewarming party with the trust papers, Alistair's champagne glass shattered on his new marble floor. I still remember the exact shade of blue the sky was that morning, cerulean, almost unnaturally bright against the autumn leaves. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The kind of perfect October day that tricks you into believing everything in your world is equally perfect and aligned. I was standing in our kitchen, the one Alistair and I had renovated 3 years earlier, with its gleaming quartz countertops and professional-grade appliances he insisted we needed. The espresso machine he'd spent nearly $5,000 on hummed in the background as I stared at my phone, trying to make sense of the notification that had just shattered my reality. "Your account balance is below the minimum requirement. Please deposit funds to avoid additional fees." I frowned, opening the banking app to investigate what must surely be a mistake. Our joint savings account, the one containing nearly 20 years of careful planning, the one earmarked for retirement and emergencies, showed a balance of $12.46. The investment account we'd built together, 0 our checking account, $237.19. Every financial safety net we'd constructed over our 18 years together had vanished overnight. My hands trembled as I called Alistair, my husband of 15 years, and partner for 3 years before that. The call went straight to voicemail, his professional voice instructing me to leave a message. I tried again, and again. On the 4th attempt, my phone pinged with an incoming text. "I deserve happiness. Jennifer makes me happy in ways you never could. I've taken what I need to start my new life. My lawyer will contact you. Jennifer." His 29-year-old executive assistant with the perfect blowout and designer wardrobe that seemed excessive for her salary. The woman he'd assured me was just ambitious when I'd questioned their late-night strategy sessions. I sat down on the kitchen floor, still in my silk robe, the cool tiles a stark contrast to the heat rising in my chest. At 46, I had devoted my adult life to our partnership. I'd put my own career as an architectural preservationist on hold to relocate 3 times. For Alistair's climbing trajectory in investment banking, I'd planned the dinner parties that charmed his clients, renovated each home to showcase his success, and stood by him during the financial crisis when he worked 80-hour weeks and barely acknowledged my existence. And now I was alone with empty accounts and a text message. "Georgia? Georgia, are you there?" My sister Jeanette's voice echoed through the house. I'd forgotten she was coming over to borrow our vacation luggage for her trip to Portugal. I heard her keys jangling, her footsteps approaching the kitchen. "Oh my God, what happened?" she gasped, dropping to her knees beside me. I wordlessly handed her my phone, watching her expression transform from confusion to rage as she read Alistair's message and scrolled through the banking app. "That bastard," she whispered, pulling me into a fierce hug. "That absolute bastard." Jeanette stayed with me that first day, making calls I couldn't bring myself to make. She contacted our family attorney, canceled credit cards, and helped me document the financial carnage Alistair had left behind. The mortgage payment would be due in 10 days. The property taxes on our home were scheduled to draft next week. The housekeeper and gardener would arrive tomorrow expecting payment. Dad always said Alistair was a snake in an expensive suit. Jeanette muttered as she made notes of immediate expenses I needed to cover. "Remember how he refused to attend your engagement party? Said he couldn't celebrate what would eventually break your heart?" Our father, Arthur Reynolds, had been a formidable man, self-made in commercial real estate development, with a reputation for seeing through people's facades. He'd died 4 years earlier after a brief but brutal battle with pancreatic cancer, leaving his estate divided between Jeanette and me, with our Uncle Curtis as the executor. At least, that's what we'd been told. My portion had been placed in a complex trust that I hadn't paid much attention to at the time, grief-stricken and relying on Alistair to handle the details. That evening, after Jeanette reluctantly left to relieve her babysitter, I sat in Alistair's home office, searching for any clue to where he might have transferred our money. His desktop computer was gone, along with his collection of rare whiskeys, and the small rodent sculpture he'd bought at auction last year. However, he'd left behind his framed diplomas and industry awards. Too cumbersome to pack quickly, I supposed. As I pulled open his desk drawer, my phone rang with an unfamiliar local number. "Mrs. Williams? This is Evan Blackwood from Sinclair and Blackwood Law Firm. I was your father's estate attorney." His voice was formal but kind. "I've just been notified of some unusual activity with your accounts. I need to meet with you as soon as possible. Tomorrow morning, perhaps?" "My husband left me," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. "He took all our money." There was a pause on the line. "Yes, Mrs. Williams. That's precisely why I'm calling. Your father made certain arrangements in anticipation of this exact scenario." "What do you mean?" I asked, confusion momentarily displacing my shock. "I'd rather not discuss this over the phone. Could we meet at your home tomorrow at 9 a.m.? That night was the longest of my life. I alternated between rage and despair, between plotting revenge and surrendering to grief. I found myself standing in our walk-in closet at 3 a.m., staring at the empty spaces where Alistair's tailored suits had hung, the vacant shelves that had held his collection of handmade Italian shoes. 18 years reduced to vacant hangars and hollow spaces. By morning, exhaustion had hardened into resolve. I showered, applied makeup, and dressed in a navy sheath dress that had always given me confidence. Whatever Evan Blackwood was bringing to this meeting, I would face it with dignity. At precisely 9 a.m., my doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses. Evan Blackwood carried a leather briefcase that looked as if it had accompanied him through decades of legal matters. "Mrs. Williams," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." I led him to the formal living room, the one Alistair and I used only for entertaining clients and partners from his firm. It felt appropriate somehow. This meeting was business, not personal. Though in truth, nothing felt personal anymore. "Would you like coffee?" I asked, defaulting to the hostess role I'd perfected over the years. "No, thank you." Evan settled into an armchair and placed his briefcase on the coffee table between us. "I think it's best we get straight to the matter at hand." I perched on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly in my lap. "You mentioned my father made arrangements?" Evan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Arthur and I were friends for over 30 years. He was an exceptional judge of character, which made him both a formidable businessman and a fiercely protective father." He opened his briefcase and removed a thick folder embossed with the law firm's logo. "From the day you introduced Alistair to your family, Arthur had concerns." A memory surfaced. Dad pulling me aside at Christmas dinner the first year. I brought Alistair home. "Georgie?" he'd said, using my childhood nickname. "That young man is looking at our house like he's calculating its square footage value, not like he's meeting his girlfriend's family." I'd dismissed it as Dad being overprotective, too quick, to judge the ambitious young banker who had swept me off my feet. "Your father approached me 17 years ago, shortly after your engagement announcement," Evan continued. "He wanted to establish a separate trust for you, one that would remain dormant unless certain conditions were met." I leaned forward. "What conditions?" Arthur called it the snake insurance policy. A ghost of a smile crossed Evan's face. "In essence, he set aside a significant portion of his assets in a trust that would only activate if Alistair betrayed you in a specific and measurable way, financial abandonment, infidelity resulting in divorce, or both. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My throat tightened. He expected this to happen. He hoped it wouldn't, Evan corrected gently. But he prepared as if it would. That was Arthur's way. I thought about the father who had taught me to swim by tossing me into the deep end, who had made me change my own flat tire in the rain when I was 16, who had always insisted I maintain my own separate savings account even after marriage. Preparation wasn't pessimism in Arthur Reynolds' worldview, it was prudence. The trust was designed with a trigger mechanism, Evan explained, opening the folder to reveal pages of legal documents. Our firm monitors your joint accounts, with your unknowing consent from the original paperwork you signed after your father's passing. When over 75% of your joint assets were withdrawn in a 24-hour period without prior established patterns to suggest a legitimate investment move, it automatically alerted our system. I stared at him, processing this information. You've been watching our accounts for 17 years? Not personally, Evan clarified. It's an automated system, completely confidential. The specifics of the trigger conditions were known only to myself, Arthur, and our financial compliance officer. He turned to a tabbed section of the document. When the system flagged the unusual activity yesterday, I personally reviewed the transactions. Alistair withdrew approximately $3.2 million across your various accounts, leaving you with essentially nothing. He also took out a home equity line of credit against this property 2 weeks ago for an additional $850,000. The room seemed to tilt slightly. He mortgaged our house without my knowledge? How is that possible? Evan's expression darkened. I'm afraid you'll find your signature on those documents. Whether it's authentic or forged will be something to investigate. But that's a separate legal matter we can address later. He turned to another page. What matters now is that your father's contingency plan has activated. As of 8 a.m. this morning, the Georgia Reynolds Contingency Trust has been converted from a dormant entity to an active one. The assets are being transferred to accounts in your name only as we speak. I took a deep breath. What assets exactly are we talking about? Evan removed a single sheet of paper and placed it on the table between us. I glanced down and saw a number that made my vision blur. $450 million? My voice was barely audible. Your father made some particularly astute investments in the years before his passing. The trust has been actively managed since then, and the portfolio has performed exceptionally well. Evan's professional demeanor softened. Arthur wanted to ensure that if his concerns about Alistair ever proved valid, you wouldn't just be protected, you would be empowered. I stood abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the garden I'd designed when we first bought the house. The roses were in their second bloom of the season, the fountain bubbling peacefully in the center. The garden had always been mine. Alistair had no interest in it beyond appreciating how it increased our property value. There's more, Evan said from behind me. The beach property in Southampton that Alistair always wanted to sell? Arthur bought it from your uncle secretly and placed it in this trust. The art collection your mother started that Alistair insisted on keeping in storage? It's been properly maintained and is legally yours alone. Even your grandmother's jewelry that disappeared after the home robbery 5 years ago, Arthur had already secured it in a safe deposit box. He suspected the timing of that break-in was too convenient. I turned back to face him, a sudden realization dawning. The robbery happened right after Alistair's first major investment loss, the one he said was due to market volatility. Evan nodded slowly. Your father had his suspicions about that as well. A lifetime of doubts dismissed and intuitions ignored came rushing back. How many red flags had I explained away over the years? How many of Alistair's questionable actions had I rationalized to preserve the perfect image of our marriage? I need a moment, I said, sinking back onto the sofa. The weight of 18 years of deception pressed against my chest. not just Alistair's deception, but my own willful blindness. Of course. Evan gathered his papers neatly. There's no rush. The accounts are being set up as we speak, but the funds won't be fully accessible until tomorrow morning. I've taken the liberty of arranging an immediate transfer of $100,000 to your personal account for any pressing needs. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Yesterday, I had been panicking about paying the gardener. Today, I was being casually offered $100,000 as pocket change. What happens next? I asked, rubbing my temples where a headache was forming. That's entirely up to you, Mrs. Williams. My role is to execute your father's wishes and ensure the smooth transition of these assets. How you proceed, legally against Alistair, personally with your new circumstances, those decisions are yours to make. After Evan left, promising to return tomorrow with more paperwork, I wandered through the house that suddenly felt both familiar and foreign. This 5-bedroom colonial with its manicured lawn and 3-car garage had been the backdrop to my life for the past decade. Every inch reflected choices Alistair and I had made together. Or rather, choices Alistair had made that I had supported. I stopped in front of a large photograph hanging in the hallway. Alistair and I on our 10th anniversary trip to Santorini, smiling against a backdrop of white buildings and blue sea. His arm was around my waist, my head tilted toward his shoulder. We looked happy. We looked connected. Had it all been an illusion? My phone buzzed with a text from Jeanette. How did the meeting go? Call me. Instead of calling immediately, I found myself opening Instagram, something I rarely did. Alistair had always managed our social media presence, insisting it was important for his professional image to showcase our perfect life. I scrolled through his profile, noting he hadn't posted anything since a charity gala 3 weeks ago. But when I searched for Jennifer Lynch, his assistant, I found her profile had been updated just hours ago. There she was, standing on a balcony, overlooking the ocean, champagne flute raised toward the camera. The caption read, "New beginnings deserve ocean views. Satst, blessed Sati Rai dream home." I enlarged the image, my designer's eye immediately recognizing the distinctive railings and stonework of the oceanfront, an exclusive luxury development in Montauk that had been featured in Architectural Digest last year. Units there started at $3 million paid for with my money. With our money. My phone rang in my hand, Jeanette calling, not content to wait for my update. I answered, still staring at Jennifer's smiling face on my screen. Georgia? What happened? What did the lawyer say? Jeanette's voice was tense with concern. Dad knew, I said simply. All these years, he knew Alistair would do something like this. He set up a trust for me, a massive trust, that would only activate if Alistair betrayed me. There was a pause before Jeanette responded. How massive? $450 million. I heard Jeanette's sharp intake of breath. Holy shit, Georgia. That's more than I thought Dad was worth. Apparently, he made some excellent investments before he died. I closed Instagram and sank into a chair. The money transfers tomorrow morning. Evan, the lawyer, set up a smaller transfer for immediate expenses. So you're going to be okay, Jeanette said, relief evident in her voice. More than okay. Financially, yes. I stared out the window at my garden. But I just lost 18 years of my life to a man who was apparently playing a very long con. Not a con, Jeanette corrected firmly. I watched you two together. Alistair loved you in his way. He just loved himself more. And when the shiny new prospect of Jennifer came along, he bought her a condo in Montauk with our money, I said flatly. I just saw it on Instagram, Jeanette swore colorfully. That's actually good news. It establishes clear intent to defraud you. My friend Linda's brother is a divorce attorney who specializes in high net worth cases involving infidelity and financial misconduct. You should call him. I don't know if I have the energy for a legal battle, I admitted. Georgia Reynolds Williams, Jeanette's voice turned stern. You are not going to let that snake slither away with your money and your dignity. Dad prepared you for this moment. He believed in your strength even when you didn't see it in yourself. She was right. My father had never been one to let injustice stand. Neither had the Georgia who existed before Alistair, the woman who had graduated top of her class in architectural preservation, who had once confronted a developer about destroying a historic building, who had planned to restore important structures, rather than design luxury vacation homes. That woman had slowly disappeared, compromising bit by bit to accommodate Alistair's vision of success. First, it was accepting his transfer to Chicago when I had just secured a fellowship in New York. Then it was agreeing to postpone starting a family because the timing wasn't right for his career. Later, it was abandoning my preservation work, entirely to manage our social obligations and home renovations. Year by year, decision by decision, I had allowed myself to become an accessory to Alistair's life, rather than the architect of my own. You're right, I told Jeanette. I need Linda's brother's number, and I need to find out exactly where this housewarming party is happening. After ending the call with Jeanette, I sat at my desk and began making notes. Alistair had always been methodical about his social events. If he was planning to introduce Jennifer to his circle as his new partner, he would do it with carefully orchestrated flair. It would be soon, before the divorce was finalized but after he felt secure in his financial arrangements. It would be designed to rewrite our history, to position Jennifer as the natural next chapter, rather than the catalyst for destroying our marriage. I opened my laptop and logged into Alistair's email account. He had changed the password, of course, but he hadn't changed the recovery phone number, my cell phone. Within minutes, I had reset the password and was scanning his inbox. There it was, an email chain with his closest colleagues discussing a casual housewarming gathering scheduled for this Sunday at 4 p.m., just 4 days away. The address matched the oceanfront development I had recognized from Jennifer's post. In Alistair's perfectly curated world, everything happened for maximum effect. The timing of emptying our accounts, the swift purchase of a status symbol property, the immediate social event to cement his new narrative. It was all part of the performance that had been our marriage. But this time, I would be the one controlling the final act. The next morning, I woke to the chime of my phone. A notification from my banking app. Deposit complete, $100,000. 9. The initial transfer from Evan had arrived. More importantly, it confirmed that yesterday's meeting hadn't been some elaborate hallucination born of stress and sleeplessness. I made coffee, using the French press I preferred rather than Alistair's ostentatious espresso machine. My phone rang. It was Evan. Good morning, Mrs. Williams. I trust you've seen the initial transfer is complete? Yes, thank you. I cradled the phone between my ear and shoulder as I poured the coffee. And please, call me Georgia. Georgia, then. His tone warmed slightly. I wanted to let you know that the main transfer is proceeding as scheduled. The funds should be fully accessible by 10 a.m. I've emailed you the account information and temporary passwords. I took a deep breath. Evan, before I have access to that money, I need to understand exactly what my father intended. This feels overwhelming. There was a thoughtful pause on the line. Your father left a letter with the trust documents. I was planning to bring it with the final paperwork today, but perhaps you'd prefer to read it now. Yes, please. I'll scan and email it immediately. Would noon work for our meeting today? After confirming the appointment, I checked my email to find the scanned letter already waiting. My father's distinctive handwriting filled the page, his bold strokes and slight rightward slant instantly recognizable. My dearest Georgia, if you're reading this, then my worst fears about the man you married have come to pass. I take no pleasure in being right about Alistair. I would have given anything to be wrong. You might be feeling foolish right now, questioning how you missed the signs. Don't. Manipulators like Alistair are experts at making strong people doubt themselves. Your only mistake was loving completely, and that is never something to regret. The money in this trust isn't just financial security, it's freedom. Freedom to reclaim the Georgia I watched disappear little by little over the years. The brilliant, fierce woman who wanted to preserve beautiful things, who fought for history and authenticity in a world obsessed with shiny and new. Use this freedom wisely. Get angry first. You're entitled to that. Then get even. You're entitled to that too. But eventually, get living again. And Georgie? Don't waste time blaming yourself. Some people are simply snakes in expensive suits. I knew it the moment I met him. You know it now? That's enough. All my love. Dad tears streamed down my face as I read and reread the letter. My father's voice was so clear I could almost hear him speaking the words. The mixture of vindication and grief was overwhelming. I picked up my phone and called Linda's brother, the divorce attorney Jeanette had recommended. His secretary scheduled an emergency consultation for 2 p.m. that afternoon. Next, I called the security company that monitored our home. If Alistair had access to a home equity line I supposedly signed for, there was no telling what other financial time bombs might be waiting. I arranged for them to change all the codes and install new locks. The thought of Alistair walking in, with his key perhaps to collect more of his possessions, or worse, to take things that were rightfully mine, made my skin crawl. By the time Evan arrived at noon, I had showered, dressed in a crisp white shirt and black pants, and mentally prepared myself for whatever came next. He brought with him a portfolio containing bank cards, account numbers, contact information for the trust's investment manager, and a preliminary inventory of all assets now under my sole control. The beach house in Southampton is currently vacant, Evan informed me as we reviewed the documents at my dining room table. The property management company reports it's in excellent condition and ready for immediate occupancy should you wish to relocate temporarily. The idea of escaping this house, the beautiful prison I had decorated myself, was suddenly appealing. I might do that. There's one more thing, Evan said, pulling a small box from his briefcase. Your father asked that I give you this once the trust was activated. Inside the velvet-lined box was a key. Not a modern key, but an antique brass, one with an ornate bow. What does it open? I asked, turning it over in my palm. A safe deposit box at North Shore Trust Bank in the city. Arthur was quite specific that I should not know its contents, only that you would understand its significance when the time came. After Evan left, I sat still for several moments, the key cool against my skin. What final secret had my father left for me? Whatever it was, it would have to wait. I had a divorce attorney to meet. The offices of Donovan, Parker & Associates occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown high-rise, exactly the type of firm Alistair would have chosen for himself. The thought gave me a grim satisfaction. Marcus. Donovan was in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the focused intensity of someone who enjoyed complicated challenges. He listened without interruption as I detailed the events of the past 2 days, taking occasional notes on a legal pad. So, to summarize, he said when I finished, your husband cleaned out approximately $4 million from your joint accounts. Without warning, took out a fraudulent home equity loan on your primary residence, and is now publicly flaunting his relationship with his assistant in a luxury property purchased with your marital assets. That's correct. And you've just come into a substantial inheritance that was specifically designed to activate in this scenario. I nodded. Mrs. Williams, while I don't typically speak ill of potential opposing counsel, your husband has made a series of catastrophic legal mistakes. Marcus leaned forward, his expression almost eager. New York is an equitable distribution state. Courts take a particularly dim view of what we call dissipation of marital assets, spending marital funds on extramarital affairs, or making large financial moves without spousal consent. What does that mean for me? It means we're going to hit Mr. Williams with the legal equivalent of a wrecking ball. He smiled thinly. The fact that he's publicly showcasing his new relationship while living in a property purchased with marital funds creates a perfect storm of liability. He pulled a tablet toward him and began typing. I'd like to file emergency motions immediately. One to freeze any remaining joint assets, another for an expedited financial disclosure, and a third for a temporary restraining order preventing him from selling, transferring, or encumbering any property acquired during your marriage. The speed at which things were moving made my head spin. Will that affect his housewarming party on Sunday? Marcus looked up, eyebrows raised. He's hosting a social event to show off a property purchased with stolen marital assets, while still legally married to you? Yes. I found the invitation. In his email. A slow smile spread across Marcus's face. Mrs. Williams, would you like to attend this party? What? Legally, as his spouse with no separation agreement in place, you have every right to be there. In fact, your presence, along with a process server to deliver our initial filings, would create a rather powerful statement. The thought of walking into that party, of seeing Alistair's face when he realized his perfect plan was unraveling, sent a surge of something unfamiliar through me. Not quite satisfaction, not quite vindication, but perhaps justice. Yes, I said, feeling more certain than I had in years. I would like to attend that party. As I left the attorney's office, my phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it to find a message from Jennifer Lynch. I'm sorry about how things happened. Alistair said your marriage was over long before we met. I hope someday. You can understand. The audacity was breathtaking. I deleted the message without responding and hailed a taxi. There was one more stop I needed to make today, North Shore Trust Bank, to see what my father had left in that safe deposit box. North Shore Trust Bank occupied a stately limestone building in the financial district, its brass fixtures and marble floors speaking to old money and discretion. I approached the receptionist, explained my purpose, and was promptly escorted to the vault area where a manager verified my identification and Evan's authorization letter. Mrs. Williams, it's been some time since this box was accessed, the manager said, checking her computer. Almost 5 years, in fact, since your father's passing. She led me to a private viewing room after retrieving the box, a substantial metal container that required both my key and the bank's to open. When she left, closing the door quietly behind her, I sat for a moment with my hand resting on the lid. What final message had my father left for me? What had he deemed too important to entrust even to his attorney? I lifted the lid to find several items carefully arranged inside. A leather-bound journal with my father's monogram, a USB drive, a small jeweler's box, and a manila envelope labeled simply, Evidence. I started with the journal, opening to the first page where my father's handwriting flowed across the cream-colored paper. June 12, 2010, Georgie brought Alistair to dinner again tonight. I tried, for her sake, to see what she sees in him. The ambition, yes. The intelligence, certainly. But there's a hollowness there. A man shaped entirely by what others perceive, rather than any internal compass. But my daughter is in love. And so I smile and pour the scotch he pretends to appreciate, storing away the observation that he checks the label before accepting the glass, calculating its value. What troubles me most is how Georgia diminishes herself in his presence. My brilliant, outspoken daughter, suddenly deferring, watching his face for approval, editing herself mid-sentence when his interest wanes. I recognized it because I saw the same pattern with Catherine and her first husband. That slow erosion of self, barely perceptible day to day but devastating over time. I've decided to begin documenting my observations. Not to show Georgia, that would only push her away, but to establish a pattern, should the need ever arise, to protect her from what I fear this man may become. I flipped through the journal, my father's meticulous documentation spanning nearly 12 years. Each entry detailed an interaction, a comment, a financial decision that had raised his concerns about Alistair. Dates, times, witnesses, all recorded with the precision of someone building a case. Some entries brought painful recognition. November 22, 2013 Thanksgiving dinner. Georgia mentioned her preservation project for the Miller Building downtown. Passionate, articulate, her eyes bright with purpose. Alistair interrupted to discuss his upcoming promotion, deftly redirecting the conversation. When Curtis later asked Georgia to continue about her project, she demurred, saying it wasn't that interesting. Alistair squeezed her hand, approval granted for her self-erasure. I watched my daughter's light dim in real time. It took every ounce of restraint not to confront him at my own dinner table. Others revealed things I hadn't known. March 17, 2016 met Curtis for lunch. He reluctantly shared that he observed Alistair dining with a young woman at the Westbrook last week. Not business, Curtis was clear about that. Hand-holding, intimate conversation. When spotted, Alistair appeared startled, then introduced her as a family friend visiting from London. Curtis didn't believe him, but felt it wasn't his place to tell Georgia. I disagree, but respect his position, adding this incident to my growing file. First, documented evidence of potential infidelity, though unfortunately without concrete proof. I set down the journal, my hands trembling slightly. How many other family friends had there been over the years? How many times had Alistair betrayed our marriage while I was busy planning his career-advancing dinner parties? Next, I opened the envelope labeled Evidence. Inside were photographs, receipts, bank statements, and printouts of emails, all meticulously organized by date. My father, the builder who trusted nothing without proper documentation, had created a comprehensive record of Alistair's duplicity stretching back years. Credit card statements showing purchases at jewelry stores and high-end hotels that never resulted in gifts for me. Photos taken by a private investigator showing Alistair with different women, none of them Jennifer, interestingly, in situations that couldn't be explained away as professional meetings. Emails retrieved through means I didn't want to contemplate, revealing Alistair's complaints about our marriage to friends and his flirtations with others. The most recent items dated to just before my father's illness, as if his investigation had been interrupted by the cancer diagnosis. But the pattern was abundantly clear. Alistair Williams had never been the faithful, devoted husband I believed him to be. I opened the jeweler's box to find my grandmother's sapphire ring. The one Alistair had insisted was lost during a business trip to Chicago 6 years ago. I had mourned that ring, its loss representing the last tangible connection to the grandmother, who had encouraged my love of historic architecture. Finally, I plugged the USB drive into my phone using an adapter from my purse. It contained financial records, detailed tracking of unusual movements in accounts Alistair had managed, investments that mysteriously underperformed while generating fees to shell companies, tax documents with discrepancies my father had highlighted. The picture that emerged was of a man who had been siphoning off small amounts from our joint finances for years, hiding losses, and potentially engaging in financial improprieties my father suspected might even cross into illegal territory. I sat back in the private viewing room, surrounded by evidence of a deception so comprehensive, so long-standing, that it defied my understanding. How had I not seen any of this? How had I explained away the inconsistencies, the absences, the convenient losses of treasured items? The answer lay in my father's journal. Entry after entry noted how I had changed, becoming more accommodating, less questioning, gradually surrendering. My independence and critical thinking where Alistair was concerned. It wasn't just that I hadn't seen the signs. I had actively participated in their concealment to preserve the illusion of my perfect marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Donovan. Emergency motions filed. Process server confirmed. For Sunday event. Would you like us to arrange security to accompany you? I looked again at the evidence my father had compiled. Evidence that would have shattered my marriage years ago had I been willing to see it. Evidence that would now ensure Alistair faced consequences beyond the loss of his expected inheritance from my father. Yes, I texted back, and I'd like to meet tomorrow to review all financial documentation from the past 10 years. I believe there may be evidence of financial fraud beyond the recent account withdrawals. I carefully repacked everything except my grandmother's ring, which I slipped onto my right hand, and the USB drive, which I would give to Marcus tomorrow. The bank manager returned the box to the vault, and I stepped out into the late afternoon, sunlight feeling as though I had awakened from a long, disorienting dream. On the drive home, I found myself remembering specific moments, warning signs my subconscious had registered, but my conscious mind had refused to acknowledge. The late-night phone calls Alistair took in his office with the door closed, the business trips that extended without explanation, the growing emotional distance as he criticized choices I made, from friendships to clothing to the books I read. Most painful was recognizing how I had participated in my own diminishment. I had stopped pursuing preservation projects because Alistair found them quaint but impractical. I had distanced myself from college friends he deemed not ambitious enough. I had even changed how I dressed, adopting the understated luxury he preferred over the vintage pieces and bold colors I had once loved. When had I become so afraid of disapproval that I had surrendered everything authentic about myself? As the car pulled into my driveway, I noticed a different energy in myself. The shocked numbness of yesterday had evolved into something clearer, sharper. Not just anger, though there was plenty of that, but a kind of focused resolve. Alistair had taken much from me over 18 years. My confidence, my passion, pieces of my identity. But he had made a critical error in his final act of betrayal. He had freed me. That evening, I found myself unable to stay in the house. Every room, every carefully chosen object reminded me of the elaborate facade Alistair and I had constructed. Together, I called Jeanette and asked if I could stay the night. Of course, she said without hesitation. The guest room is already made up. And Georgia, bring enough for a few days. You shouldn't be alone in that mausoleum. Jeanette's townhouse in Brooklyn was everything my suburban colonial was not. Eclectic, slightly chaotic, and unmistakably authentic. Her 2 teenage daughters greeted me with the uncomplicated affection of family, untouched by my marital drama. My nieces knew only that Uncle Alistair had been a jerk, as Jeanette had diplomatically explained. After the girls went to bed, Jeanette poured us both generous glasses of red wine and settled beside me on her worn leather sofa. "You look different today," she observed. "Less shocked, more angry," I supplied. "I'm absolutely furious, not just with Alistair, but with myself." I told her about my father's journal, the evidence he'd collected, the years of deception I had somehow failed to see, or chosen not to see. "Don't do that," Jeanette said firmly. "Don't blame yourself for his betrayal." "But I participated in it, Jeanette. I made it so easy for him. Every time I ignored my instincts, every time I chose not to ask questions, I was helping him construct the lie." Jeanette set down her wine glass with more force than necessary. "Georgia Reynolds, you listen to me. What you did was trust your husband. That's not a character flaw. It's what people in committed relationships are supposed to do. Alistair is the one who abused that trust, not you." I wanted to believe her, but the evidence of my complicity felt overwhelming. I had constructed an elaborate psychological framework where Alistair's success justified any compromise, where his happiness was the ultimate measure of our marriage's health. "I need to talk to him," I said suddenly. "Before the party. Before the legal confrontation. I need to look him in the eye and ask why." Jeanette's expression shifted to alarm. "That's a terrible idea. Marcus will tell you the same thing. Any conversation you have now becomes part of the legal record." Alistair is manipulative. He'll twist your words, make you doubt yourself again. I'm not the same person I was 3 days ago, I insisted. I won't be manipulated again. You're not thinking clearly. The Georgia I know is methodical, strategic. This impulse to confront him now before you have everything in place? That's emotion overriding your judgment. She was right. But the need to speak to Alistair felt visceral, a desperate attempt to make sense of 18 wasted years. Just one phone call, I said. I won't meet him in person. I just need to hear his voice when I ask him why. Jeanette sighed, recognizing my determination. If you're going to do this regardless of my advice, at least let me be here when you call, and promise me you'll hang up the moment he starts his usual mind games. I nodded, already pulling out my phone. It was nearly midnight, late enough that the call would catch him off guard, but not so late that he could reasonably ignore it. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice wary. Georgia? Hello, Alistair. I kept my tone neutral, fighting to control the surge of emotions his voice triggered. I was going to call you tomorrow, he said, the familiar smoothness returning to his voice. My lawyer advised waiting until the paperwork was in order, but I've been concerned about you. The audacity nearly took my breath away. Concerned about me, after emptying our accounts and disappearing with your assistant? I know how this looks, he began, but there are circumstances you don't understand. Jennifer and I, it wasn't planned. Sometimes these things just happen. Like the home equity loan just happened? Like the $4 million vanishing from our accounts just happened? There was a brief silence. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted, less conciliatory, more defensive. I built those accounts, Georgia. My work, my investments. You contributed nothing financially for 15 years. Because you insisted I leave my career to support yours, I countered, feeling a flush of anger rise in my cheeks. That was your choice, not mine. A choice you were happy to make when it meant luxury vacations and charity galas, he snapped, his mask of reasonableness slipping. Let's not pretend you were some martyr to my ambition. You enjoyed the lifestyle. Jeanette, listening beside me, made a slashing motion across her throat, cut the call. But I needed to hear this, needed to experience firsthand how quickly Alistair could rewrite our history. One question, Alistair. Was any of it real? Any part of the last 18 years? His sigh was theatrical, practiced. Of course it was real. But people change, Georgia. I've outgrown what we had. Jennifer understands. My ambitions in ways you never could. Jennifer is 29 and impressed by your status, I said flatly. I wonder how she'll feel when she learns you're not as financially secure as you've led her to believe. What are you talking about? His voice sharpened. I know about the financial improprieties, Alistair. The shell companies. The misrepresented investments. My father documented everything. The silence that followed told me more than any denial could have. I'll see you on Sunday, I said, and hung up before he could respond. Jeanette stared at me, eyes wide. What financial improprieties? What wasn't in the journal? Nothing specific, I admitted, but his reaction just confirmed my suspicions. My father noted discrepancies he couldn't fully explain. Now I know there's something there worth investigating. For the first time since discovering the empty bank accounts, I smiled. A genuine, if grim, expression. Alistair always told me my preservation work was impractical, but it turns out I'm very good at excavating buried truths. The next morning, I met with Marcus Donovan in his office, the USB drive from my father's safe deposit box in hand. Before we discuss Sunday's approach, there's something you need to see, I said, placing the drive on his desk. My father was apparently conducting his own investigation into Alistair's financial activities for years. I think there may be evidence of fraud beyond just the emptied accounts. Marcus raised an eyebrow but said nothing as he plugged the drive into his computer. We spent the next hour reviewing the files, spreadsheets meticulously annotated by my father, copies of tax documents with highlighted discrepancies, records of transfers to entities I'd never heard of. Your father was remarkably thorough, Marcus said finally, looking up from the screen. These aren't just suspicious patterns, they're potentially criminal activities. Criminal? The word felt strange in my mouth. I had prepared myself for discovering infidelity, for confronting financial betrayal, but criminal activity hadn't factored into my understanding of who Alistair was, or who I had been married to. Based on what I'm seeing, Alistair has been running a sophisticated scheme for at least a decade. Marcus pointed to a particular spreadsheet. These entities receiving consulting fees from your joint investments don't appear to be legitimate businesses. They're likely shell companies he controls. For what purpose? Tax evasion at minimum, possibly hiding losses from bad investments he didn't want you or his clients to know about. There may even be elements of a Ponzi scheme here. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Williams, with your permission, I'd like to bring in a forensic accountant from our firm and, potentially, discuss this with the Financial Crimes Division of the District Attorney's Office. I stared at him, the implications slowly sinking in. You're saying Alistair could go to prison? It's certainly possible. These activities, if proven, carry serious penalties. I thought about the journal entries, my father's careful documentation of Alistair's character over the years. Had he suspected something of this magnitude? Was this why he had created such an elaborate trust to protect me? Do what you need to do, I told Marcus. But I'd prefer to keep this separate from Sundays. Confrontation. I want to handle one crisis at a time. Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. That's wise. Let's focus on the divorce proceedings and the recovery of your marital assets first. This potential criminal matter will take time to develop properly. As I left his office, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Georgia. It's Curtis. Just heard from Alistair. He's spinning quite a tale about your separation. Can we meet for coffee? There are things you should know. My Uncle Curtis had always been the quieter counterpart to my father's forceful personality. Where Arthur Reynolds had built an empire through sheer determination, his younger brother Curtis had preferred a less visible role in the family business, managing properties and investments with a careful, analytical approach. We met at a small cafe in Chelsea, far from the financial district where Alistair might have colleagues or the Upper East Side where our social circle predominated. Curtis stood as I approached his table, enfolding me in a warm hug that felt like the first genuine, human contact I'd had in days. You look remarkably composed for someone whose life just imploded, he observed as we sat. Appearances can be deceiving, I replied. Isn't that the lesson of the week? Curtis smiled sadly. Your father would be proud of how you're handling this, though not surprised. He always said you had more steel in your spine than anyone recognized, including yourself. What did Alistair say to you? I asked, not wanting to dwell on my father's faith in me when I felt I had let him down so thoroughly. Curtis sighed, stirring his coffee absently. He called yesterday, claiming you were having some kind of breakdown. Said you'd been struggling with depression for years, that your separation was mutual but you'd become unstable, making wild accusations. And you didn't believe him. Of course not. I've known that man was trouble since your engagement party, when I caught him flirting with one of the caterers while you were greeting guests. Curtis's expression hardened. But that's not why I wanted to meet. There's something you need to know about your father's investigation. My breath caught. You knew about that? I helped him with it, especially in the last few years. Curtis reached into his jacket and withdrew a slim manila envelope. When Arthur got sick, he asked me to continue monitoring certain aspects of Alistair's activities. There wasn't time to fully brief you before he passed. And afterward, well, you seemed so devoted to Alistair that Arthur had instructed us not to intervene unless absolutely necessary. Us? Evan Blackwood and I? We were the only ones Arthur trusted with the full scope of his concerns. Curtis slid the envelope across the table. These are account numbers for additional offshore holdings we believe Alistair controls. They weren't on the USB drive because we only confirmed them last year. I stared at the envelope, then back at my uncle. Why didn't you tell me? Your father was very clear. The trust would activate if Alistair betrayed you financially or through infidelity, but the evidence of potential criminal activity was to remain sealed unless you discovered it independently. Curtis's eyes were kind but serious. Arthur believed you needed to come to certain realizations on your own. He was protecting not just your finances, but your autonomy. I thought about the journal entries, how my father had documented not just Alistair's betrayals, but my gradual surrender of independence. He hadn't wanted to rescue me. He had wanted to ensure I had the resources to rescue myself when I was finally ready to see the truth. There's one more thing, Curtis said, his voice dropping slightly. The beach house in Southampton? Alistair doesn't know it, but that's where your father stored the original hard copies of all his evidence. There's a hidden safe in the library, behind the first edition of The Great Gatsby on the third shelf. The combination is your mother's birthday. I closed my eyes briefly, overwhelmed by the layers of protection my father had woven around me, contingencies within contingencies, all while I had been blind to the danger living in my own home. Thank you for telling me this, I said finally, and for helping Dad protect me, even when I didn't want protection. Curtis covered my hand with his. Georgia, you were always the brightest star in Arthur's universe. Everything he did was to ensure that no one, especially not the man you married, could permanently dim your light. After meeting with Curtis, I didn't return to Jeanette's. Instead, I instructed my driver to take me directly to Southampton. I needed to see what my father had preserved there, needed to stand in a space that was now truly mine, uncontaminated by Alistair's influence. Though, late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the property as we pulled up the winding drive. The beach house, a sprawling shingled structure overlooking the Atlantic, had been in our family for 3 generations. Alistair had always considered it outdated, constantly pushing me to sell it to finance a more suitable vacation property in the Hamptons proper. Now I understood why my father had been so insistent that it remain in the family, going so far as to repurchase it from Curtis to place in my trust. The house smelled of salt air and lemon polish, maintained but uninhabited. I walked through the rooms, running my fingers along familiar surfaces, the wide plank pine floors my grandfather had salvaged from an 18th century barn, the built-in bookshelves my father had crafted himself one summer, the window seats where I had spent countless rainy days reading while the ocean churned beyond the glass. In the library, I easily located the first edition of The Great Gatsby on the third shelf, exactly where Curtis had described. Behind it was an almost invisibly seamed panel that swung open when pressed, revealing a small wall safe. My mother's birthday, April 12th, translated to 042, which clicked the safe open on the first try. Inside was a thick portfolio embossed with my father's initials. I carried it to the oversized leather chair by the window, the one where my father had always sat during family gatherings, and began to review its contents. What Curtis had given me was just the tip of the iceberg. Here was the complete record of my father's investigation: bank statements, private investigator reports, tax documents, offshore account details, and correspondence with financial experts who had helped him piece together the evidence. Alistair Williams, golden boy of Morgan Stanley, trusted financial advisor to some of New York's wealthiest families, had been systematically misappropriating client funds for years. He had created a labyrinthine structure of false investments, shifting money between accounts to cover losses and skim profits, all while maintaining the facade of successful money management. And I, the wife who managed his social calendar, hosted his client dinners, renovated homes to project success, had been an unwitting accessory to his scheme. The realization hit me with physical force. How many people had entrusted their savings to Alistair based partly on my apparent endorsement? How many had been charmed by dinner parties in our perfect home, reassured by my presence that Alistair Williams was a family man of integrity? My phone rang, startling me from these thoughts. It was Jeanette. "Where are you? I came back from picking up the girls and you were gone." "I'm at the beach house," I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "I needed some space to think." "Is everything okay? You sound strange." "Alistair isn't just a cheater, Jeanette. He's a criminal, a financial criminal who's been stealing from clients for years." There was silence on the line then. "Jesus, Georgia, are you sure?" Dad was sure. He collected evidence for years. That's why he created the trust, not just to protect me from divorce, but to protect me from potential criminal liability when Alistair's schemes eventually collapsed. Criminal liability? You didn't know anything about this. Ignorance isn't always a defense, I said, flipping through more documents. Especially when you're the spouse who benefited from the proceeds, whose signature is on joint tax returns. Another silence. Then Jeanette asked, "What are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do with this knowledge? The confrontation planned for Sunday suddenly seemed trivial compared to the magnitude of what I'd discovered. This wasn't just about my betrayal or my stolen funds. There were potentially dozens of victims who had trusted Alistair with their financial futures. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "I need to think." After promising Jeanette I would call her in the morning, I ended the call and sat watching darkness fall over the ocean. The rhythmic sound of waves against the shore had always helped clarify my thoughts, even as a child. My father had left me with a terrible choice. I could use this evidence to ensure Alistair faced justice for his crimes, potentially sending him to prison. But that path would almost certainly involve public exposure, scandal, and a painful reckoning with my own unwitting role in his deceptions. Or I could focus solely on my divorce proceedings, using just enough leverage to secure what was rightfully mine without triggering the full collapse of Alistair's house of cards. That approach might spare me public humiliation, but it would leave his other victims without justice. What would the pre-Alistair Georgia have done? The idealistic preservationist who believed in protecting what was valuable and authentic. I opened my father's journal again, turning to the final entry, dated just 2 weeks before his cancer diagnosis. June 4th, 2020. I worry I've waited too long. The evidence against Alistair mounts, but Georgia remains devoted. Would exposing him now only hurt her? Would she even believe me without experiencing his betrayal firsthand? Curtis says I'm overthinking this, that the trust will protect her, financially regardless. But money has never been my primary concern for my daughter. It's her spirit I fear for, her sense of self that has been so gradually eroded she doesn't even recognize its absence. The Georgia I raised would never stay silent in the face of wrongdoing, would never value comfort over justice. That Georgia would want to know the truth no matter how painful. I have to believe that woman still exists beneath the perfect corporate wife Alistair has molded. I have to believe that when the moment comes, and it will come, she will choose truth, however difficult. My daughter has always been stronger than she knows. My final gift to her will be the resources to rediscover that strength when she needs it most. I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face. My father had seen me more clearly than I had seen myself. He had recognized my gradual surrender to Alistair's vision, my abandonment of values I had once held dear. But he had never lost faith that the real Georgia, the one who valued authenticity and justice, would eventually reemerge. The choice before me was suddenly crystal clear. Sunday's confrontation would proceed as planned, but it would only be the beginning. Alistair Williams would face the full consequences of his actions, not just for what he had done to me, but for what he had done to everyone who had trusted him. I picked up my phone and called Marcus Donovan. I need to amend our strategy for Sunday, I said when he answered. And first thing Monday morning, I want to meet with the district attorney's office. There's something they need to see. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright over the Atlantic. I had spent the night in my childhood bedroom at the beach house, sleeping more soundly than I had in days, despite the weight of decisions made and still to come. After a simple breakfast on the deck, I called Marcus to finalize our approach for tomorrow's confrontation. His assistant connected us to a conference call that included Linda, the forensic accountant he had brought onto the case. Mrs. Williams, I've reviewed the preliminary documents you provided, Linda began, her voice precise and measured. While a complete forensic analysis will take weeks, I can confirm that the evidence points to systematic financial fraud over a period of at least 8 years. What's the potential scale? I asked, watching seagulls wheel against the blue sky. Based on client lists and asset management figures, we're looking at potentially $40 to $50 million in misappropriated funds, Linda replied. Mr. Williams appears to have been running what amounts to a private Ponzi scheme, using new client investments to cover losses and withdrawals while skimming significant amounts for personal use. The number staggered me. $40 to $50 million, stolen from people who had trusted Alistair with their life savings, retirement funds, children's college accounts. How did he hide this from his firm? I asked. Very carefully, Linda said. He operated at the edges of legitimate investment activity, creating vehicles that appeared sound but channeled funds through offshore entities. The firm's compliance department should have caught this, frankly. Their failure to do so may create additional liability. Marcus cleared his throat. Georgia, I've spoken with a colleague in the white-collar crimes division of the DA's office. They're extremely interested in your father's evidence. They've suspected irregularities in some of Alistair's investment vehicles for some time, but lacked concrete evidence to move forward. What does this mean for tomorrow? I asked, focusing on the immediate challenge. Strategically, it changes. Nothing, Marcus assured me. We proceed as planned with the divorce filings and asset recovery motions. The criminal aspects won't be addressed until our meeting with the DA on Monday. And Alistair won't see it coming, I said, more to myself than to them. No, Marcus confirmed. The emergency motions served tomorrow will focus exclusively on the marital assets he liquidated and the fraudulent home equity loan. Nothing will tip him off about the broader investigation until the authorities are ready to move. After ending the call, I spent the afternoon walking the beach, mentally preparing for what lay ahead. The wind whipped my hair, longer now than Alistair preferred, another small rebellion I had begun in the months before his departure. I had sensed something ending even then, though I couldn't have imagined the form that ending would take. By evening, I had formulated my approach. This wasn't just about reclaiming financial assets or even exposing Alistair's criminal activities. It was about reclaiming my voice, my agency, my identity, separate from the carefully constructed persona of Mrs. Alistair Williams. I called Jeanette to let her know I wouldn't be returning to Brooklyn tonight. I'm staying at the beach house, I told her. I need the space to center myself before tomorrow. Are you sure you should be alone right now? She asked, concern evident in her voice. I looked out at the darkening ocean, feeling more clear-headed than I had in years. I'm not alone, I said. For the first time in a very long time, I'm actually keeping myself good company. Sunday morning. Arrived with a sense of inevitability. I dressed with deliberate care in a slate blue sheath dress, professional enough to signal confidence, elegant enough to belong at an upscale housewarming, with just enough understated authority to make a statement. I paired it with my grandmother's sapphire ring and matching earrings. The set Alistair had claimed was outdated years ago, encouraging me to accept the modern diamond pieces he preferred. As I was preparing to leave, Evan Blackwood called. Georgia, before you proceed with today's confrontation, there's something else you should know. His voice carried an unusual note of satisfaction. The final component of your father's trust has just activated. What do you mean? I thought everything transferred on Friday. The bulk of the assets, yes. But your father created a secondary trigger related specifically to the oceanfront development in Montauk. I sat down, suddenly alert. The building where Alistair bought a condo for Jennifer? Precisely. The development was one of your father's final investments through a holding company called Lighthouse Partners. Arthur structured his ownership stake with a unique provision. He retained the right to approve or deny any purchase within the building, masked as a standard board review requirement. Understanding dawned slowly. Are you telling me? As of Friday afternoon, Alistair's purchase of Unit 1620 at the oceanfront has been officially rejected by the board. The rejection explicitly cites character concerns and financial irregularities. The funds remain in escrow and will be returned to the account of origin, which is now frozen by court order thanks to Marcus's emergency motions. I couldn't help the small laugh that escaped me. My father anticipated this exact scenario? Alistair using our money to buy property in that specific building? Not exactly, Evan clarified. Arthur invested in several high-end developments across the region with similar provisions. It was a safeguard against precisely this type of situation. Alistair attempting to quickly establish a new residence with marital assets. Your father called it his firebreak strategy. So Jennifer's dream condo never actually belonged to them. The champagne-fueled housewarming they're hosting today is celebrating a property they don't legally own and now cannot purchase. I closed my eyes, imagining Alistair's reaction when he discovered this additional layer of my father's foresight. He had always underestimated Arthur Reynolds, dismissing him as a self-made man who lacked the sophistication of Alistair's Ivy League peers. That dismissal had been his first mistake of many. Thank you for telling me this, Evan, I said, a new confidence infusing my voice. It changes my approach somewhat. I thought it might, he replied. Your father would have enjoyed this moment, Georgia. Not the pain Alistair has caused you, but watching you reclaim your power. That was always his hope. After the call ended, I texted Marcus with this new information. His response was immediate. This strengthens our position considerably. Mrs. Williams, I believe you're about to have a very satisfying afternoon. The drive to Montauk took just over an hour from Southampton. I spent it reviewing mental notes about what I would and wouldn't say. This confrontation wasn't about emotional catharsis. It was about strategic advantage and reclaiming narrative control. As we approached the oceanfront, I could see why Alistair had chosen it. The gleaming glass structure rose dramatically above the surrounding landscape, a monument to wealth and exclusivity. The kind of place where someone like Alistair Williams belonged, or thought he did. The security guard at the entrance checked his list, then nodded deferentially when I gave my name. Mrs. Williams, you're expected. Unit 1620, top floor North Tower. Of course I was on the guest list. Alistair would want to display his triumph over me to our entire social circle. He couldn't resist the theatrical flourish of including his discarded wife on the invitation list, confident I would never actually appear. In that, as in so many things, he had miscalculated. The elevator rose smoothly to the 16th floor. As the doors opened, I could hear the murmur of conversation and soft jazz from down the hallway. Marcus and his associate were waiting discreetly by the stairwell, as arranged. Perfect timing, Marcus said quietly. The process server arrived 5 minutes ago and is waiting for your signal. I nodded, straightening my shoulders and lifting my chin. Then let's not keep him waiting. The door to Unit 1620 stood open, soft lighting and conversation spilling into the hallway. I paused, just outside, taking a final moment to center myself. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a reclamation. I thought of all the ways I had diminished myself over the years, speaking more softly in Alistair's presence, deferring to his preferences in everything from home decor to vacation destinations, gradually surrendering my professional ambitions to support his. That Georgia, the compliant, accommodating Mrs. Williams, had disappeared the moment Alistair emptied our accounts. In her place stood someone both familiar and new. The core of who I had always been, enhanced by a clarity that only betrayal could have crystallized. I stepped through the doorway into the expansive living area. The space was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a panoramic ocean view, modern furnishings and tasteful neutrals arranged to maximize the vista. About 30 people mingled throughout the room, champagne flutes in hand. I recognized most of them. Partners from Alistair's firm, couples from our country club, a few neighbors from my neighborhood. Their conversations faltered as they noticed me, surprised expressions quickly masked behind polite smiles. No one approached. Alistair stood near the windows, his back to the entrance as he gestured expansively, describing some feature of the property to an attentive audience. Jennifer was at his side, hair perfectly styled, wearing a cream-colored dress that looked new and expensive. My money had apparently funded a wardrobe upgrade along with the property. It was Patricia Lawson, the managing partner's wife, who alerted them to my presence. I saw her eyes widen, her hand touch Alistair's arm in warning. He turned, his practiced smile freezing when he saw me. For a single, gratifying moment, Alistair Williams, master of composure and control, looked utterly blindsided. I moved toward them with deliberate steps, aware of conversations dying around me, of curious glances following my progress. Jennifer's expression cycled rapidly from shock to alarm to a forced smile. "Georgia." Alistair recovered quickly, his voice carrying just the right note of sympathetic concern. "This is unexpected. Are you... well?" The subtle emphasis on the final word sent the message to everyone listening. His estranged wife was unstable, her appearance here concerning rather than appropriate. "I'm excellent, thank you," I replied, my voice clear and steady. "I wouldn't miss celebrating such a significant purchase. After all, I have a vested interest in how our marital assets are being spent." A ripple of uncomfortable murmurs spread through the nearest guests. Alistair's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps we should speak privately," he suggested, already moving to guide me toward a hallway. "I don't think that's necessary," I said, maintaining my position. "I'm simply here to deliver some paperwork. 2 items, actually." I opened my clutch and removed an envelope, extending it toward him. First, notification that the purchase of this unit has been rejected by the building's board. Apparently, there are concerns about your financial stability and character. The property isn't yours, Alistair. It never was. Jennifer's champagne glass tilted dangerously in her hand. "What is she talking about? The closing was finalized last week." "Conditionally finalized," I corrected her, "pending board approval, which was officially denied on Friday. The earnest money remains in escrow, though it's now subject to the asset freeze ordered by the court." "What asset freeze?" Alistair's voice had lost its public smoothness, a harder edge emerging. I nodded toward the doorway, where Marcus now stood with his associate and the process server. "That's the second item. Emergency motions filed with the court regarding the liquidation of marital assets without consent, and the fraudulent home equity loan you took against our primary residence." The process server stepped forward, extending a thick envelope. "Alistair Williams? You've been served." The silence in the room was absolute. Every guest stood frozen, witnessing the public unraveling of Alistair's carefully constructed narrative. He made no move to take the envelope, so the server placed it on the sleek console table beside him and retreated. Only then did I allow myself to meet Alistair's eyes directly. What I saw there wasn't remorse or even embarrassment. It was cold, calculated fury. The mask fully dropped to reveal the man my father had recognized from the beginning. "You have no idea what you've done," he said, voice low enough that only Jennifer and I could hear. Actually, I replied with equal quietness, I know exactly what I've done. This is just the beginning. The elegant housewarming disintegrated quickly after that. Guests made hurried excuses, gathering coats and purses, avoiding eye contact as they filed past me toward the exit. The managing partner lingered briefly, his expression unreadable as he studied Alistair, then me, before departing without a word. Within 15 minutes, only 5 people remained in the spacious condo. Alistair, Jennifer, Marcus, his associate, and me. I suggest we sit down, Marcus said, his tone professionally neutral. There are several matters to address. I'm not discussing anything without my attorney present, Alistair snapped, finally picking up the legal documents from the console table. That's your prerogative, Marcus acknowledged. However, as the property you're currently standing in is no longer available to you, perhaps you'd prefer to schedule a meeting at our offices tomorrow? Jennifer sank onto a nearby chair, her earlier confidence evaporated. This can't be happening. We've already invited people to stay here next weekend. I've ordered custom furniture. Alistair didn't comfort her. His attention remained fixed on me, calculation replacing his initial shock. I'd seen this expression before, Alistair regrouping, reassessing, formulating a new strategy. He had always been most dangerous when cornered. Whatever you think you're doing, Georgia, it won't work, he said, his voice regaining its smooth assurance. I have resources you don't know about, connections you couldn't begin to understand. Like the offshore accounts? I asked quietly. The ones in the Caymans, Singapore, and Belize? Or do you mean your connections to Lighthouse Partners and the shell companies you've been using to siphon client funds? The blood drained from his face so rapidly, I thought he might faint. You're bluffing, he managed finally. You don't know anything about my business affairs. You never have. That was certainly what you counted on, I agreed. My total ignorance was essential to your operation. The devoted wife who handled the social calendar while you handled the finances. The perfect arrangement, until it wasn't. Jennifer looked between us, confusion evident. What offshore accounts? Alistair, what is she talking about? He ignored her, his focus entirely on me. Whatever amateur investigation you think you've conducted, you're out of your depth. Back off now, and I'll be generous in the divorce settlement. Push this, and you'll get nothing. Marcus cleared his throat. Mr. Williams, I strongly advise you not to make statements that could be construed as threats. It won't help your position. My position is still stronger than you realize, Alistair countered, a trace of his characteristic arrogance returning. Georgia signed the same tax returns I did. If there were any irregularities, she's equally implicated. So there it was, the threat I had anticipated since discovering the extent of his financial crimes. He would try to drag me down with him. That's an interesting perspective, I said, maintaining my composure. Fortunately, my father anticipated that strategy as well. He was quite thorough in documenting my lack of involvement or knowledge in your financial dealings. Arthur Reynolds was a self-important fool who got lucky in real estate, Alistair sneered, his facade cracking further. He never understood sophisticated financial strategies. What he understood was character, I replied. Something I failed to recognize the importance of for far too long. Jennifer suddenly stood, gathering her purse. I need to leave. I need to think. Her voice trembled slightly. Alistair, call me when you've sorted this out. He made no move to stop her as she headed for the door, her expression shell-shocked. The beautiful young assistant who had seemed such a prize was already distancing herself from what she now recognized as a potential disaster. As the door closed behind her, something shifted in Alistair's demeanor. The public mask had served its purpose, and now, with only Marcus, his associate, and me as witnesses, he allowed his true self to emerge. You have no idea what you're interfering with, he said, his voice colder than I had ever heard it. there are other people involved. Powerful people who won't appreciate this disruption. Are you referring to clients whose funds you've misappropriated, or to accomplices? I asked, genuinely curious about how deep his deception went. His laugh was short and bitter. You really believe this is just about some creative accounting? Your father may have had resources, Georgia, but you're playing in a league you don't understand. For the first time, I felt a flicker of uncertainty. What exactly had I stumbled into? Was there something beyond financial fraud in Alistair's activities, something even my father hadn't fully uncovered? This conversation is over, Alistair declared abruptly. You've had your moment of triumph, Georgia. Enjoy it while it lasts. The drive back to Southampton passed in contemplative silence. Marcus had offered to accompany me, but I declined, needing space to process what had just occurred, not just the public confrontation, but Alistair's cryptic parting words. You're playing in a league you don't understand. What had he meant? Was it merely the defensive posturing of a man whose schemes were unraveling, or was there something more sinister beneath the surface? I called Curtis the moment I arrived at the beach house. It's done, I told him when he answered. The legal papers are served, and Alistair knows I have evidence of his financial crimes. How did he react? Curtis asked, his tone concerned. Initially shocked, then threatening. He implied there's more to this than just his individual fraud. Something about other people involved, and me not understanding what I'm interfering with. Curtis was silent for several seconds. That tracks with something your father suspected toward the end. He believed Alistair might be laundering money for some less than reputable clients, possibly with international connections. A chill ran through me. Are you saying he could be involved with criminal organizations? Not directly, perhaps, but financial criminals often find themselves serving multiple masters once they cross certain lines. Your father could never confirm his suspicions. The evidence trail went cold at several points. I sank into a chair, the weight of this new possibility settling heavily. Curtis, what have I stepped into? Something your father was prepared for, he assured me. Why do you think he created such an elaborate protection system? The emergency motions Marcus filed will freeze Alistair's known assets. Your meeting with the DA tomorrow will set official investigations in motion. Alistair is contained, Georgia. His threats are just that. Threats. I wished I could share Curtis's confidence. The Alistair I had glimpsed today, cold, calculating, almost menacing, seemed capable of more than I had previously imagined. I'm staying at the beach house tonight, I told Curtis. I've asked the security company to send someone to monitor the property, just as a precaution. Good. I'll drive out first thing tomorrow to accompany you to the DA meeting. After ending the call, I walked through the house, checking locks and setting the alarm system. The security company had promised to have someone on site within the hour. Until then, I was alone with my thoughts and the steady rhythm of waves against the shore. I found myself drawn to my father's study, a room that had always been his sanctuary. The leather chair behind the desk still held the impression of his form. The bookshelves displayed his eclectic reading tastes, from architectural histories to spy novels. On the wall hung photographs documenting his life and career, project groundbreakings, family vacations, charity events. One photo in particular caught my attention. My father and me at my college graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming at the camera. I was dressed in academic regalia, clutching my newly minted architectural preservation degree, eyes bright with purpose and possibility. What had happened to that young woman? How had she allowed herself to be so thoroughly sublimated to another's ambitions? The answer, I realized, wasn't simple. It hadn't been one moment of surrender, but 1,000 small compromises. A suggestion here about a more suitable career path. A comment there about what successful couples did. Alistair's influence had been insidious precisely because it was incremental, each adjustment so slight that I hardly noticed the cumulative effect. Until I found myself standing in an empty house with empty bank accounts, finally seeing the complete picture. My phone chimed with a text from Marcus. Security detail has arrived at your gate. DA meeting confirmed for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Try to rest. Rest seemed unlikely given the circumstances, but I appreciated the sentiment. I made a cup of tea and carried it out to the deck overlooking the ocean. The security guard, a retired police officer named Jim, had done a perimeter check and now sat discreetly in his vehicle at the end of the driveway. As darkness settled over the water, I mentally prepared for tomorrow's meeting with the district attorney. It would require detailed explanations of everything I had discovered, careful presentation of my father's evidence, clear delineation of my own ignorance regarding Alistair's criminal activities. It would also mean publicly acknowledging how thoroughly I had been deceived by the man I married, a humiliation I would have once found unbearable. Now, strangely, I felt only a growing resolve. The shame wasn't mine to carry. It belonged to Alistair, who had betrayed not just me, but everyone who had trusted him. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a reckoning long overdue. Monday morning arrived with unexpected chaos. I awoke to multiple missed calls and urgent texts from Marcus, Curtis, and even Evan. Before I could respond to any of them, my phone rang again. Marcus calling for what appeared to be the 5th time in an hour. "Georgia, where have you been?" His normally composed voice carried an edge of genuine alarm. "Have you seen the news?" "I was asleep," I said, instantly alert. "What's happened?" "Alistair attempted to leave the country last night. He was arrested at Teterboro trying to board a private flight to Venezuela." I sat up abruptly. "Arrested? By whom?" "FBI. Apparently, they've had an ongoing investigation into certain investment vehicles he's been managing. Your evidence and our emergency motions accelerated their timeline." My mind raced to process this information. He was fleeing. Yes, with documents and hard drives that agents seized at the terminal. "And Georgia?" Marcus paused. "He wasn't alone. They also detained 3 other individuals, including a partner from his firm and someone the FBI describes as a person of interest in multiple financial crime investigations." So Alistair's cryptic warning had substance behind it. He wasn't just a sophisticated financial criminal working alone. He was part of a larger network. "The DA still wants to meet this morning," Marcus continued. "In fact, it's become more urgent. The Bureau is involved now, and they're particularly interested in your father's evidence. How quickly can you get to the city?" Curtis arrived 30 minutes later to drive me into Manhattan, a copy of my father's complete files secured in his briefcase. During the drive, we pieced together what little information was publicly available. Financial news outlets were reporting Alistair's arrest in carefully hedged terms, prominent investment advisor detained for questioning, potential connections to international finance investigation. "Your father would be relieved this is happening now," Curtis said as we navigated morning traffic. "He always feared the longer Alistair's schemes continued, the more people would be hurt when they eventually collapsed. And the more deeply I might be implicated," I added, understanding with new clarity why my father had created such elaborate protections. The district attorney's office was already crowded when we arrived. Marcus met us in the lobby, escorting us upstairs where a conference room had been commandeered for what was clearly a major operation. FBI agents, financial crimes investigators, and legal staff moved purposefully through the space. Assistant District Attorney Caroline Walsh greeted us with brisk efficiency. "Mrs. Williams, thank you for coming. Your timing with these files couldn't be more critical. We've been building a case against several of your husband's associates for months, but he himself has been remarkably elusive, until now." She introduced me to Special Agent Daniel Morgan from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, who regarded me with careful assessment. "Mrs. Williams, I need to be clear about something up front," he said. "While we have no reason to believe you were knowingly involved in your husband's activities, we will be thoroughly investigating your level of awareness and participation." "I understand," I replied steadily. My father anticipated that concern, which is why his documentation includes evidence of my exclusion from financial decisions and Alistair's deliberate concealment of information from me. For the next 3 hours, I answered questions, reviewed documents, and provided context where I could. I detailed how Alistair had systematically isolated me from financial matters, insisting it was his domain, while encouraging me to focus on social and domestic responsibilities that enhanced his professional image. The turning point was obviously when he emptied your accounts, Ada Walsh noted, reviewing the timeline. Did you have any warning that was coming? None, I said. Though in retrospect, there were signs something was changing. He became more secretive, more critical of small purchases I made. He began questioning whether certain social connections were still valuable to us. Preparing to discard assets that no longer served his purposes, Agent Morgan observed. Including you, Mrs. Williams. The statement was blunt but accurate. To Alistair, I had been merely another asset, valuable while I enhanced his image, disposable when circumstances changed. As the meeting concluded, Agent Morgan pulled me aside. You should know that we've placed a security detail on your primary residence and this beach property. Alistair Williams was involved with people who don't appreciate loose ends. Are you saying I'm in danger? I asked, keeping my voice even despite the surge of anxiety his words triggered. I'm saying we're taking precautions. Until we've identified all parties involved in this network, everyone connected to the case receives protection. Standard procedure. Nothing about this situation felt standard, but I nodded my understanding. As Curtis and I prepared to leave, Ada Walsh handed me her card. We'll need you to remain available for additional questions, she said. And Mrs. Williams, your father's foresight likely prevented this situation from becoming much worse. For you, and for many others. The days following Alistair's arrest unfolded with surreal intensity. His face appeared on financial news programs, in newspaper headlines, and across social media, the golden boy of wealth management revealed as an architect of systematic fraud. Each report uncovered new layers of deception, expanding the circle of both accomplices and victims. I remained at the Southampton house, following Marcus's advice to avoid my primary residence where journalists had begun to gather. The FBI security detail maintained a discreet but constant presence, a sobering reminder that the danger might not be entirely over. 3 days after the arrest, Jennifer Lynch texted me. I swear I didn't know about any of this. Please believe me. I didn't respond. Whether she had known about Alistair's criminal activities seemed almost irrelevant compared to the fact that she had knowingly participated in his betrayal of our marriage. There would be no absolution from me. Jeanette arrived on Thursday, insisting on staying for a few days despite my assurances that I was coping well. You don't have to be strong all the time, she said, unpacking groceries in the kitchen. What you're going through would break most people. I'm not most people, I replied, surprising myself with the certainty I felt. And I'm not broken. That evening, we sat on the deck watching the sunset, a bottle of wine between us. The constant tension of the past week had begun to ease, replaced by an odd sense of suspended animation, waiting for the next development. The next revelation, the next step in a process that had taken on its own momentum. Have you thought about what comes next? Jeanette asked, refilling our glasses. After the legal proceedings, I mean. I hadn't, not really. The immediate crisis had consumed all my attention. Meetings with investigators, consultations with Marcus about the divorce proceedings, arrangements for securing my assets against potential claims from Alistair's victims. Suppose I'll sell the house in Greenwich, I said finally. Too many memories there, and most of them feel false now. And then, I looked out at the ocean, its surface turned golden by the setting sun. I'm not sure. For so long, my life was defined by being Alistair's wife. I barely remember who I was before that. I remember, Jeanette said gently. You were passionate about architectural preservation. You wanted to save beautiful old buildings from being demolished to make way for glass towers. You had that fellowship offer from the Hudson Valley Heritage Foundation. The memory surfaced slowly, the excitement I'd felt upon receiving that offer, the projects I'd dreamed of tackling, the difference I'd hoped to make. Then came Alistair's unexpected job opportunity in Chicago, his persuasive arguments about advancing his career first so we could later afford for me to pursue my hobby without financial constraints. I'd never gone back to it. The temporary pause had become permanent, my professional aspirations gradually replaced by the full-time job of being Mrs. Alistair Williams. I wonder if they still need preservationists, I mused, something long dormant stirring within me. Why? Don't you find out? Jeanette suggested. You're certainly not constrained by finances now. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. The possibility of reclaiming not just financial independence but purposeful work, identity beyond the ruins of my marriage. My phone rang, interrupting these reflections. It was Agent Morgan. Mrs. Williams, we've completed our review of the evidence you provided, he said without preamble. I wanted to inform you personally that we've found no indication whatsoever of your knowledge or participation in your husband's schemes. You've been officially cleared of any potential charges. Relief washed through me, though I had never truly feared legal consequences. My father's documentation had been too thorough, too explicit in demonstrating my exclusion from Alistair's financial dealings. There's more, Agent Morgan continued. Mr. Williams has begun negotiating with prosecutors. He's offering information about his network in exchange for consideration in charging and sentencing. He's betraying his associates to save himself, I said, unsurprised. Loyalty had never been Alistair's strong suit. Essentially, yes. And Mrs. Williams? He's specifically requested to speak with you. I froze, my wine glass halfway to my lips. Why would he want to see me? He wouldn't say. You're under no obligation to agree. In fact, both your attorney and our office would advise against it at this stage. I thought about Alistair sitting in a detention center, his designer suits, exchanged for standard issue clothing, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. What could he possibly have to say to me now? I'll consider it, I said finally, but not yet. After ending the call, I relayed the conversation to Jeanette, who was predictably opposed to any meeting. He's manipulating you, she insisted. Even now, he's looking for angles, trying to use whatever connections he can. She was probably right. Yet something in me needed closure, not for Alistair's benefit, but for my own. Before I could move forward, I needed to look my husband in the eye one final time, with full awareness of who he truly was. But that moment would come on my terms, not his. For now, there were more immediate concerns. My formal statement to the press that Marcus was drafting, the upcoming court date for the divorce proceedings, and the gradual process of reimagining a life that was now entirely my own to shape. I'm thinking about reopening the New York apartment, I told Jeanette, changing the subject. The one in the pre-war building on Riverside Drive that Dad left me. Alistair always hated it, said it was outdated and impractical. Jeanette smiled, which means it's probably beautiful and full of character. It is. It needs work. But the bones are spectacular. Herringbone floors, original moldings, windows overlooking the park. As I described the apartment, I felt a spark of the enthusiasm that had once defined me. The appreciation for craftsmanship and architectural integrity. The eye for potential beneath neglect. Perhaps this was where reconstruction began. Not with grand plans for the future, but with reclaiming pieces of myself that had been set aside but never truly lost. 3 weeks after Alistair's arrest, the initial media frenzy had subsided, replaced by the slower, more methodical process of legal proceedings. The FBI had identified most of his network, including 2 international financiers and a senior. partner at his firm who had facilitated the movement of questionable funds through legitimate-appearing channels. The scope of the fraud had expanded beyond even what my father had documented. Nearly $70 million misappropriated over a decade, affecting dozens of clients and multiple financial institutions. Alistair faced charges that could result in decades of imprisonment. I had declined his request to meet, following Marcus's advice to maintain distance until the divorce proceedings were further along. Whatever Alistair wanted to say could wait, until I was legally disentangled from him. Meanwhile, I had begun the process of reclaiming my life in tangible ways. I returned to using my maiden name, Georgia Reynolds, filing the paperwork the same day the divorce petition was submitted. I contacted a real estate agent about listing the Greenwich house once the legal holds were lifted. And I had begun renovations on the Riverside Drive apartment, working with a preservation architect to restore its original character while updating systems for modern comfort. Most significantly, I had reached out to the Hudson Valley Heritage Foundation. Their current director, Elaine Michaels, remembered me from my fellowship application 15 years earlier. "We actually have a board position opening," she told me during our lunch meeting in the city. "Someone with your combination of architectural knowledge and financial resources would be invaluable. Would that interest you?" It would be a beginning, a way to reconnect with the field I had once loved while leveraging my unexpected wealth to protect historic properties from development. I accepted on the spot. This particular morning found me at the beach house, reviewing renovation plans for the apartment with the architect. We had just finished discussing options for restoring the original kitchen cabinetry when my phone rang. Curtis. Calling. "Georgia, have you seen today's journal?" he asked without preamble. "No, why?" Alistair's plea deal was announced. 20 years with possibility of parole after 12, in exchange for full cooperation against his associates and restitution to victims. I set down my coffee cup, processing this information. 20 years. Alistair would be in his 60s before he had any chance of freedom. "There's more," Curtis continued. "He's forfeiting all assets, including any claim to marital property. Marcus says this essentially fast-tracks your divorce. There's nothing left to negotiate since Alistair has surrendered everything." "Did he have a choice?" I asked, wondering if this was strategic rather than conciliatory. Not much of one. The evidence was overwhelming. This was his best option to avoid what could have been an effective life sentence. After ending the call, I walked to the beach, needing to clear my head. The reality of Alistair's fate, a fate he had constructed for himself through years of deception and fraud, had finally solidified. The man who had shaped my adult life would spend the next 2 decades in federal prison. I felt neither satisfaction nor sorrow, just a strange sense of completion. The chapter was closing, not with the dramatic confrontation I had once imagined, but with the bureaucratic finality of plea agreements and asset forfeitures. My phone chimed with a text from Marcus. "In light of today's developments, would you reconsider meeting with Alistair? His attorney has reached out again, quite insistent that he has something important to tell you in person." I stared at the message, waves lapping at my feet as I considered the request. What could Alistair possibly say that would matter now? Apologies seemed pointless, explanations too late, justifications hollow. Yet something in me needed this final conversation. Not for reconciliation or even understanding, but for the clear-eyed acknowledgement of what had been real and what had been illusion in our 18 years together. "Yes," I texted back, "but on my terms, no attorneys present, just him and me." Marcus's response was immediate. "Strongly advise against this. If you insist, let's discuss parameters to protect your interests." 2 days later, I sat in a private conference room at the Federal Detention Center, waiting for Alistair to be brought in. I had dressed with deliberate care, a simple navy dress, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Professional, composed, Nothing like the carefully curated wife of Alistair Williams aesthetic he had preferred. When the door opened and he entered, I was struck by how ordinary he appeared without the armor of his bespoke suits and cultivated confidence. The orange jumpsuit and institutional setting stripped away the trappings that had made him seem exceptional. "Georgia," he said, taking the seat across from me. "Thank you for coming." I studied him silently, noting the shadows beneath his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He appeared to have aged years in a single month. "Your attorney said you had something important to tell me," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "I'm listening." Alistair's hands rested on the table between us, fingers interlaced to hide their slight tremor. "I wanted to tell you that I've signed everything. The divorce papers, the property settlements, all of it. You won't have to fight me for anything." "I know. Marcus informed me of your plea deal." "It's not just about the plea," he said, a hint of his old impatience surfacing. "I wanted you to hear it directly from me. I'm not contesting anything. What was ours is yours now." I regarded him steadily. "Nothing was ever truly ours, Alistair. You made that clear when you emptied our accounts." He looked away, unable to maintain eye contact. I panicked. Things were collapsing faster than I could fix them. Jennifer was a distraction, a fantasy of starting over. "With my money," I added quietly. "Yes." The admission seemed to cost him something. "With your money, with Arthur's money, ultimately." A silence stretched between us, not the comfortable silence of long companionship, but the weighted pause of two people who had shared a life yet somehow remained strangers. "Why did you want to see me?" I asked finally. "Not to apologize, certainly." His laugh was hollow, entirely without humor. "Would you believe an apology if I offered one? After everything?" "No." "Then, let's not insult each other with pretense." He leaned forward slightly. "I wanted to see you because you're the only person who knew me before all this. Before I became this." He gestured vaguely at himself, at the institutional surroundings. "I never knew you," I countered. "Not really. My father saw the truth. From the beginning, but I refused to see it." Alistair's expression tightened at the mention of my father. Arthur was a perceptive man. I underestimated him significantly. "You underestimated me as well." "Yes," he acknowledged, surprising me with his candor. "That was perhaps my greatest miscalculation." The admission hung in the air between us. I waited, sensing there was more he wanted to say. "They're investigating." "Jennifer," he said finally, "for potential involvement in the fraud." I raised an eyebrow. "Was she involved?" "No." She was exactly what she appeared to be, an ambitious young woman dazzled by wealth and status. "She had no idea where the money came from, just like me," I observed. "No," Alistair said sharply, "nothing like you. You chose not to see because you loved me. She chose not to see because she loved what I could give her." The distinction seemed important to him, though it made little difference to me now. Whether blind from love or ambition, the result had been the same: willing participation in an elaborate illusion. "I told the prosecutor she wasn't involved," he continued. "It's the one true thing I can offer at this point, to prevent someone else from being punished for my actions." I studied him, wondering if this belated attack of conscience was genuine or simply another calculated move. With Alistair, it was impossible to be certain. "Is that all?" I asked, gathering my purse. I had heard enough. He hesitated, then reached into the pocket of his jumpsuit and withdrew a small folded paper. "One more thing. I found this in my personal effects when they were cataloging everything for asset forfeiture. I thought you might want it back." He slid the paper across the table. I unfolded it carefully to reveal a photograph, faded and creased with age. It showed a much younger version of myself, standing proudly in front of a Victorian building, architectural. Plans rolled under my arm, face alight with purpose and passion. My first preservation project during graduate school. "You kept this?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "It was in my wallet," Alistair admitted. "All these years. I'm not sure why." I tucked the photograph into my purse, this small artifact from a life interrupted. "Goodbye, Alistair. Georgia." He spoke my name like a complete sentence, finality in each syllable. I didn't look back as I left the room, the heavy door closing, behind me with decisive finality. 6 months later, I stood in the center of my renovated apartment on Riverside Drive, morning light streaming through restored leaded glass windows. The space had been transformed, original architectural details preserved and highlighted, modernized where necessary, but with respect for the building's heritage and character. Like me, I thought with a small smile, the divorce had been finalized, with unprecedented speed, given Alistair's comprehensive surrender of all claims. The media interest had gradually faded as new financial scandals took center stage. The FBI protection detail had been withdrawn once the last of Alistair's associates was apprehended. Life had acquired new rhythms, new purposes. My position on the Heritage Foundation Board had expanded to include oversight of a special fund for emergency acquisition of threatened historic properties. I had reconnected with colleagues from my brief professional life before Alistair, finding mentors and friends eager to welcome me back to the preservation community. Most importantly, I had rediscovered the woman glimpsed in that faded photograph, not unchanged by experience, but fundamentally intact beneath the layers of compromise and accommodation. The doorbell rang, interrupting these reflections. It was Jeanette, arriving for the small housewarming gathering I'd planned to celebrate the completed renovations. "It's magnificent," she declared, turning slowly to take in the space. "Like stepping back in time, but in the best possible way." "That's the goal of good preservation," I replied, leading her toward the terrace where drinks were arranged. Honoring the past while creating something that functions for the present. Curtis arrived next, followed by Evan Blackwood and several colleagues from the Heritage Foundation. As conversation flowed and laughter filled the rooms my father had left me, rooms Alistair had dismissed as outdated and impractical, I felt a profound sense of rightness, of return. Later, as sunset painted the sky in spectacular oranges and pinks beyond my terrace, Curtis raised his glass in a quiet toast. "To Arthur," he said simply, "who saw further than any of us." "To Dad," I agreed, thinking of the father whose protection had extended beyond death, whose faith in me had never wavered even when my faith in myself had faltered. And silently, I added another toast. To Georgia Reynolds, who had been lost but was now found, who had endured betrayal but refused to be defined by it, who had discovered, in the ruins of one life, the foundation for another far more authentic and purposeful. The inheritance my father left wasn't just the money that secured my future. It was the example of integrity that would guide it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.